there, I'm your host Dan Rojas, and I'm standing in front of a giant painting that Denise painted the other day. We're getting ready for an art show this coming weekend, and this gives me an opportunity to show you how to stretch a piece of canvas. Now, if you're not an artist, you probably may not know what stretch a piece of canvas means. It's kind of a little artist term. Basically, you take a piece of canvas and you stretch it around the piece of wood. I'm going to show you some of our artwork, and most of it's done on canvases that we stretched ourselves. And then I'm going to show you how you can use that same concept to stretch just about any material to capture the wind and maybe make your own vertical windmill. This is an actual piece of the Berlin Wall that Denise painted for an up-and-coming art event. These are some of her other paintings from her celebrity series. Denise's style is considered photorealism. She uses acrylic on canvas that we stretch ourselves. These are some of my paintings from my tropical fish series. And these are some more of my paintings, including some very vibrant colors. This is from a series I call Solar Fish. These fish were molded out of clay, then cast out of zinc using a large Fresnel lens to melt the metal. I'll be showing you that in an up-and-coming video. This is a giant piece of drop cloth canvas. You can buy this stuff at Lowe's or just about any home improvement store. This is the thicker version, and a big sheet of this costs around 35 or 40 bucks, but it covers a lot of area. What we use it for is to make our blank canvases. All the paintings that I showed you was painted on this. And we basically take a piece of wood, make a stretcher frame, and then stretch it. That's what I'm going to be showing you. Now, if you're an artist, you can make one of these for around $3. And if you want to try to be an artist, you can save a little money. And if you mess up, well, you lost $3, but you learned something. Now, the nice thing about this, the way that I'm going to show you how to stretch it, that's different than the way a lot of people do it, these are really tight. I like to make them like a drum. So you could use these to make blades for windmills. You could use, instead of buying fresh canvas, you could find a good use for some very sturdy recycled material that maybe you picked up at a yard sale or found on the side of the road. This is a great way to do that. The first thing that I'm going to do is show you how to make this stretcher frame. This is a standard 2x4. The dimensions of this 2x4 are not 4 inches by 2 inches as the name would imply. It's actually 3.5 inches across by 1.5 inches deep. We're going to be cutting this 2x4 right down the middle. So to do that, we're going to have to set our saw at 1 3/4 of an inch. Now the saw blade's going to take about 1/8 of an inch off of that measurement, so we're going to go just a little bit less than 1 3/4 of an inch. Once we have this cut, I'm going to show you how to make the stretcher rails. I usually set the saw guide at a little bit less than 1 3/4. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to take the board and you're going to put a minor tiny nick in it. Then you're going to take the board and flip it over. This is going to ensure that the board is centered. If the nick is off, then you need to adjust your blade. You continue by ripping the 2x4 right down the middle. You want to try to keep the board as firmly pressed against the rip guide as you possibly can. Alright, so there you go. Split the 2x4 right down the middle. Now, if you're going to be using this to just capture wind, you don't have to do this next step, but it will make your canvas significantly tighter. If you're going to be using these to paint on, you don't want to paint across the entire surface of this as the canvas is stretched across there, or you're going to end up with a big 1.5 inch line on all the corners of your painting. So what you do is you put a little ridge on there. This is how all professional stretcher frames are made, and it makes the canvas a lot tighter too. You're going to have a piece of wood that is 1.5 inches high by 1 3/4 inches wide. You want to lay it on the saw so that the 1.5 inch part sticks up, so that you're cutting a 1.5 inch depth into the wood. You're going to lower the saw blade so that it leaves about 1/4 of an inch behind of the stock. You're going to place the guide so that there is a 1/8 of an inch space in between the guide and the blade. Slowly run the wood across the blade, removing some of the wood and making sure that it is firmly pressed against the rip guide. This should be a long, consistent cut. many airplanes fly over my house a day? Ooh, I'm gonna do a special on noise pollution. Alright, if you did this first step right, you should have cut both pieces of wood to look something like that. So you've got this ridge in there, and this just barely hanging on. I'm gonna get you a close-up of it and see if that, you should leave enough wood. You don't want to go right to the very edge, because the next step is gonna get this to be exactly what we need. Next, you're gonna lower your blade, and you're gonna remove the rip guide. This will enable you to see what you're doing. You want to lower the blade so that it barely pushes into the gap that was left behind by the earlier cut. Next, slide the guide over and use the wood as your measuring instrument. You want to just barely nick the wood so that you leave the 1/4 inch rail behind. It's a good idea to just cycle your saw, quickly turn it on and off, and run a sample nick in the wood to see how accurate you are. If you find that you cut too shallow or too deep, as I just did with this piece, you can readjust your guide at this point and continue with the cut. This cut is relatively easy and doesn't require a lot of pressure on the wood, but it is a good idea to firmly press the wood against the guide so that you do not waver back and forth. The extra piece of wood should simply fall off of the board. If you did this correctly, both of your pieces should look just like this. You should have a nice little ridge there that goes something just like that. This is the ridge that the canvas is going to set on, and this is going to be the gap side. So once you have this completed, we're going to move on to the miter saw. You want to set your miter saw to a 45-degree cut and place the lip facing down on the saw. This will give you a nice first cut at a 45-degree angle. The lip should be on the outer section of the longest piece of the wood. The relief should be on the shortest piece of the wood. Lay the board on its side and measure to your desired length. Put a tiny pencil mark on the rail portion, and your second cut will be with a rail facing up. This will give you a nice V effect. You're going to take your next piece of wood and rotate it so that the lip is facing down again. This is going to create a small scrap piece of wood, but it will reset your wood for the next cut. It's a good idea to take your first piece of wood and use it as a measuring guide for your next cut. It's very important that these are as close to the same size as possible. You're going to repeat this process with the other pieces of wood so that you have 4 pieces of wood ready to join together. We've got our 4 pieces of wood here ready to go. We're going to go inside, put them together, and stretch some canvas.